thank you so much for coming to the first SWGI seminar of the spring semester. We have a really exciting semester of events lined up. I think we've shared the calendar with everyone, and I think we have more seminars this semester than we've probably ever had before, which is a wonderful thing. And mostly they happen every 2 weeks, but sometimes they happen more than that on Tuesdays at this time. We're really lucky to have Dr. Gwendolyn Kirk here as our first speaker for the semester. She is a linguistic anthropologist who joined LUMS last semester, and she's in the Gramani Center for Languages and Literature. And she is going to talk to us about one of her research projects, which is looking at 2 very interesting films, I think. So I'm going to hand over to Gwen. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much, Nida. Thank you everybody for being here. I'm really excited to share this research because this has come a long way from looking at several very different films and trying to bring them all together, hopefully as you'll see, toward kind of a more general understanding of the relationship between linguistic practices and gender overall in Pakistani film. So, I'll get started. I'm reading a paper, but I'm going to try not to make it too boring, so I have 3 clips as well. So just to contextualize a little bit where I'm coming from in this project, traditionally cinematic texts have been considered kind of off limits for the study of linguistic variation, not natural language, right? And similarly, scholars of film focus on narrative, visual, and sonic content, but often without a close attention to linguistic detail. So in recent years, a burgeoning body of studies in sociolinguistics and linguistic anthropology seek to question these attitudes by foregrounding language in the study of cinematic, semiotics, performance, and reception, and by considering cinema with other media as a legitimate site for linguistic inquiry, what Kay Richardson and Robin Queen have called the sociolinguistics of cinematic discourse. In this paper, I examined 2 films in detail, 1957's Yakkey Wali and 1979's Aurat Raj, to ask how vocal drag and translanguaging perform identity crossings in ways that complement or complicate other narrative dimensions of these films. Moreover, I seek to develop a diachronic understanding of these practices through the concepts of citationality and enregisterment, to think through how their development both resonated with their contemporary audiences, but also may have impacted later films and later audiences. For instance, I and others have argued for the centrality of language and voice in understanding gendered performance in popular Punjabi cinema. For example, this genre of Bardhak, which is a verbal dueling style, that's the hallmark of much of Pakistani Punjabi cinema since the 1980s, which allows for on-screen re-articulations of gender and class hierarchies. So in looking at these 2 films, Yakkey Wali and Aurat Raj, which are decades apart, I hope to explore earlier instantiations of the intersection of gender, voice, and power in order to better contextualize the development of later gendered performance styles. I argue that focusing on gender citational, Butler, or genderizing, Eckert and McConnell-Janae, Hall, Buckles, linguistic elements, such as pitch prosody, lexicon, morphosyntax, or multimodalities, allows us a more nuanced understanding of gender reversal performances in film. In the Pakistani context specifically, this has ramifications for understanding the ways other identity formations emerge in performance, such as class, ethno-linguistic identity, and alignment with national or moral hegemonies. It also offers insight into how indices of such identity formations develop over time. So I'm going to start by talking about Yakkey Wali. Maybe. I can figure. Oh my God. Okay. No, I just did something wrong. Go back to this. Okay. Oh, I didn't keep my nostalgic font. Okay. So the film Yakkey Wali, which came out in 1957, directed by M.J. Rana, narrates the story of Lali, a young woman who lives in a rural village and supports her blind uncle and younger brother and sister on the meager income she gets ferrying passengers to and from the railway station in her yakka, a single-axle horse cart. Lali falls in love with Aslam, an educated young man from Lahore, who's a doctor, who temporarily visits her village, and they almost get married until, of course, a series of tragic events causes their wedding to be called off at the last moment. So looking for him, she follows him to Lahore, where she disguises herself as a man and continues driving her yakka to support her ailing younger sister and kind of continue her search in the space of the city. Eventually her secret is revealed by the film's villain when she is taken to court for driving without a license. And despite her impassioned pleas, she is no longer allowed to drive her yakka. Once it's taken away and her drag persona is finished with by order of the court, a series of tragic events ultimately allows her to reunite with the hero and re-enter the domain of heteronormative and upwardly mobile femininity. So, sorry, that was just the capsule plot. There was a lot in that movie. There were like people falling off of buildings and lots of long lost relatives and things. So hopefully you got a good enough idea of it. The film was a financial success and an early hit for new star Musarrad Nazir. However, it was not received very positively by the critical establishment. I found this gem in an essay on the history of cinema in Lahore, written in 1962 for a literary magazine called Nakush. So this is by literary critic Ahmed Said, who writes, "The biggest reason for the crisis that has begun in this industry, in the Pakistani film industry," and this is 1962, right, which we think of as the golden era. "The biggest reason for the crisis since the last 3 or 4 years were those shameful commercial Punjabi films of which their makers themselves appear to be embarrassed. These films were Mahi Munda and Yakkey Wali. After the endless popularity of the aforementioned Punjabi films, the film studios seem to be opium dens rather than temples, and film companies give the appearance of whorehouses." So although he doesn't actually go into what he finds objectionable in the films, it's not unreasonable to think that one of the main objections would be Lali's violation of gender norms. And I, for the life of me, can't figure out what else in these films could possibly be objectionable, because by today's standards, they're very clean. So Said actually contrasts these two movies with some Saf Suthri Urdu films that were going on at the time. So either it's because they're in Punjabi or it's because of the gender crossing, right? Lali spends a large part of the film dressed in men's clothing, although notably still sporting heavy makeup, dark lipstick, and never without a safa that can also be read as a dupatta. She even becomes the object of inadvertent lesbian desire as she negotiates the attentions of her neighbor girl Minno. She's depicted driving across the geography of Lahore from the walled city to Folletti's hotel and interacting with speakers of different regional and class identities in its cosmopolitan space. One of the film's most famous songs, and some of you may have heard it, is a tappa called Kali Savari Bhai, Bhati Bahari Bhai. It features shots of Lali intercut with those of other yakka drivers singing about the different places in the city. And it really emphasizes, I don't have time to show the song unfortunately, but it really emphasizes her ambiguity in her new role, both in content, because a lot of the lyrics are punning and double meaning, but also its form. And even though Lali is dressed in male clothing and in her kind of male persona, notably she keeps the name Lali, though, even as a man. The tappa genre itself is often associated with female singers, particularly during weddings, or as a song duel between male and female singers. So even this particular kind of style of song or genre of song is very gendered. So Lali in Lahore, I think, I have a picture of her. Do not have a photo. Lali is able to pass mostly using her drag, right? Which is not just visual, but also linguistic and bodily, right? Different discursive practices that are male gendered. So she uses masculine gendered agreement morphology, which means she says, me. She uses the ah verb endings instead of e verb endings. So me karda instead of me kardi right? And masculine, and she has a high tendency towards the intimate pronoun tu, use of which is also gendered in Punjabi. And masculine bodily practices such as smoking, sitting in wide-legged stance, indelicate eating habits. It's of course a working class masculinity. As Butler argues in Imitating Gender, drag implicitly reveals the imitative structure of gender itself, as well as its contingency. So here the pleasure for the audiences lies not in Lali's success at imitation, but in their privileged position of seeing through it, right? We're in on the joke, revealing the bivalency of each action. One particular scene that, again, I don't think we have time to see it, but Lali was looking for something to eat, and she's told by the storekeeper that he doesn't have the thing she wants, he only has dil. So, मैं दोनों dil khawasa, right? And there's a whole exchange in wordplay about dil that's because she's a woman in drag, right? However, he's an old guy, so it's kind of morally safe because he's like very old uncle. Okay, so perhaps the most interesting thing linguistically for me in this film is the way she negotiates the cosmopolitanism of the city. Unlike the trend in later Punjabi films, Yakkey Wali does not situate Punjabiyat or Punjabi identity in binary opposition to urban Urdu-speaking cultural hegemony, right? Which is the trend that came out later in the 70s and 80s. Rather, Punjabi is an unmarked identity rather than a marked identity. And the salient uncrossable boundary is that of social class, and particularly remnants of the colonial elite. So in one particular sequence, Lali is seen negotiating fares and plying her trade with stereotypical representations of other ethno-linguistic identities. First, she encounters an Urdu-speaking Muhajir family. There's a thin old man carrying a spittoon for his span and referred to as Bardinio. And he has his two bickering burqa-clad wives and a gaggle of small children, and they're all fighting. And then there are various other ethnic stereotypes that follow. There's a Saraiki speaker, a Sindhi couple, a Dohari speaker, which is also interesting because this hints that the identity categories that are salient in today's cinema for showing like diversity in Pakistan are not the same identity categories that would have been imported in the 50s, right? At least for Lahori audiences. So through translanguaging, through code mixing, right, she navigates these encounters with ease, aligning her speech with that of her outsider interlocutors, and her only near miss is when the Sindhi-speaking woman questions her lack of facial hair, although she runs away and avoids getting caught. However, her drag does break down, not in the crossing of gender or ethnic boundaries, but ultimately in the crossing of class-based linguistic ones, namely her ability to speak English. Again, Urdu here is remarkable by its absence, suggesting that at this point it had not really eclipsed Punjabi as the hegemonic language for Lahori audiences at that time. In this short scene that I'm going to show you, Lali's search for Aslam takes her to Foletti's Hotel, one of the most well-known colonial era establishments in Lahore. So we'll watch this short clip. We're just going to watch about, I think, 3 minutes.
Hello,
बाबूजी ऐसे नहीं होता है
भाई इतने साढ़े वर्ग नहीं सोने चौड़ उड़ा दे
अच्छा दिलों पे आज असी भी चौड़ होके देखने हैं
और नहीं मियाँ तू नहीं अंदर जा सकता
क्यों
ऐसे सिर्फ सूट बूट वाले जाने ने या फिर जिन्ना साढ़े वर्ग के कपड़े पाए हो नाल बंदे को थोड़ी जिनी यस नो भी आनी चाहिए आओ
No, yes. Yes, no, no, yes.
yes and no ultimately gives her away, leading her to offend the other patrons of the bar, to accidentally drink whiskey, to be called a fool. And another key foregrounding of the potential of passing and crossing opens up when the band begins simply. So you have this tuxedo jazz band positioned in front of the heart-shaped backdrop, and the stage is all set for like a Helen-esque vamp to jump out, right, in a Western dress or something. However, we see Lali's eyes light up as a young woman wearing traditional, almost like to the point of stereotypical traditional Punjabi clothes, and performing a folk-esque song for the room full of Western elites, right? So in a space where nothing Punjabi would be expected to be seen, the singer in fact echoes Lali's pre-drag identity, and Lali is confronted with her own image through the eyes of an urban elite male other. The dancer goes around the tables in the room, and I won't show you the full sequence, but the camera at times is just really focused on Lali's transfixed face, and at times shooting directly over her shoulder, facing the dancer, but forcing the viewers into that same encounter with her. Through Lali, the audience is able not only to enjoy the cosmopolitan space of Follettis and the images of English-speaking women in dresses and alcohol and jazz bands, but also to see their own culture through a different, exotifying outsider's lens, recalling Berenstein's notion of spectatorship as drag, here not just in terms of gender, but also in terms of class and ethnic identity. Okay, so Lali's free access to the public spaces of the city, even in instances like this Folletti scene, is a direct result of her drag performance. However, the filmmakers, of course, are careful to cloak this as her majority, right? She's being forced to do this. So in the court scene later on, where her original gender is revealed, Lali pleads her case by asking the judge, you know, if I hadn't pretended to be a boy, you know, would my honor have been preserved in this city, right? And she's told because she's a woman, she can't get a license to drive a yucca. So her response is, why not? A woman can get a license to sell her honor, right? Why not to do mehnat mazdoori, hard labor? Women can become nurses, work in offices, join the police, but I can't drive a yucca. And she says, if I wasn't able to work, what should I have done? You know, should I have sold my honor? So she very explicitly here reframes her drag performance as, you know, she was forced to do it, right? So Lali's gender transgression explicitly, ultimately, kind of upholds that moral superiority of the patriarchal system that has failed. So we're going to move on to talk about the second film, Aurat Raj, which is a kind of more explicit, if still kind of limited, critique of patriarchy. So many of you may have seen this film. It was made in 1979, directed by Rangila. A fantasy film played out largely in an extended dream sequence. The narrative charts the abused housewife Sophia's rebellion against her drunken, womanizing husband, who himself follows the classic Muslim social trope of a husband misbehaving in order to force his wife to petition for a divorce, thereby getting rid of the wife and not having to pay her up there, right? So fed up with her plight and that of countless other women, Sophia becomes the leader of the Aurat political party, which by contesting elections against the Murd party and the transgender Khwaja community who run as Azad Ummidwar, independent candidates, she comes to power and becomes the new head of state of Pakistan. So upon taking power, she's immediately approached by a group of shady Westerners in another kind of crossing played by Pakistani actors, right? But, you know, speaking that kind of Aurat Urdu, who offer to sell her a powerful bomb with a curious effect. This bomb will cover the entire nation with a smoke that turns all women's voices to men's, and all men's voices to women's. Sophia, determined to buy the bomb, mortgages the entire country to the Westerners in order to buy it, also subtly implicating the West for disrupting traditional gender roles. The bomb is bought and set off, and for almost the entire remainder of the film, the dubbing of the actors' voices is done by actors of the opposite gender, right? So when Rani, or the heroine, or any other female character opens her mouth, a low-pitched male voice is heard voicing her character, and when Sultan Rahi or Waheed Murad speak, it's in a high-pitched, almost exaggeratedly feminine, kind of squeaky tone, and often very helpless and breathless, right? So all of these prosodic characteristics, in addition to just the gender of the actor, are really being exaggerated here. There are clear elements of the carnivalesque in these role reversals, but perhaps most interesting is that the power to cross, and here is in large part not merely in like kind of a visual transformation, In the crossing of the performance of communicative practices, strikingly here her voice. So she hasn't called for a gender reversal, but what she's called for, she has called for a vocal reversal, or a nationwide performance of vocal drag. Although this was not an explicitly stated effect of the bomb, to accentuate the vocal changes, men's clothing and bodily movements become feminized. Men are portrayed with long hair and makeup, wearing brightly colored shalwar kameez, and wearing the dupatta over their head. They use feminized exclamations such as "Hi Allah," and they move in exaggeratedly feminine ways. You can see the transformation here. Their access to public space is also limited. As with the transposition of voice, women now fearlessly roam the streets, drive trains, command armies, work as prison guards, while men are suddenly forced to move carefully to guard their izzat. However, they have not become women. They do not wear padding to suggest breasts or wider hips. Their bodies under their clothes are unchanged. And although the voices that emerge from their mouths are undoubtedly performed by female dubbing artists, they remain jarringly grammatically masculine, again with a masculine verbal morphology. So you get actors saying, "Hi Allah, me Maria." You know, it's like very subtle and very jarring. So there's an even more complicated layering of kind of gender transgressions. Nothing is fitting. Similarly, the women in the film have not become men with the effects of the bomb. Although they wear pants and shirts and military and jail uniforms, their body shapes are not disguised, and they retain, again, that feminine verbal agreement. So I'm going to show a short clip just to illustrate what became of Sultan Rahi when the bomb went off. Didn't go well for him. So he's just been rescued from being of similar scenes that this audience would have seen, right? They're reiterations of common cinematic tropes. Sultan Rahi himself points to this fact that, you know, I used to say of girls, izzat all the time, and now, is bachana mushkil ho gaya. So, The humor lies in the regendering of the familiar filmic tropes. Each instance is a citation of numerous other films. As Konstantin Nakasis writes, all citations are interdiscursive. Each citation reanimates other events of discourse, presenting them in a context alien to their original utterance, and bringing reflexive attention to this very operation. So citations are interdiscursive acts that are reflexive about that very fact of their repetition. Right? Foregrounding the citationality of such performances can also lead into insights into reception, as it focuses our attention to the durative nature of the relationship between filmmakers and audiences. So a great deal of the comedy in the film comes from these uncanny disjunctures. For example, a train is delayed for an hour because the driver has just given birth to a baby, and this is accompanied by these like masculine-sounding grunts of pain. Or a mustachioed father in a dupatta goes to negotiate his son's marriage and brags that he's been kept in parda and taught all the important household skills like knitting and embroidery. Of course, these lighthearted scenes also can very, very easily be read by audiences as a scathing critique of established gender roles. In one particular scene, a burqa-clad teenager coming home from school with his friends, who are having a conversation about jewelry and movies, gets sexually harassed and abducted by a gang of pants-clad smoking women on the street. He attempts to shame them by asking, "Don't you have a father or a brother at home?" And so this is, of course, a reversal of the stock phrase, "Don't you have a mother or sister?" Deployed by women when harassed, asking their assailants to relent by relating their own plight to those of the women in their harasser's family. So, I'd like to show that clip too, if it's okay. Do we have time? Can I show another clip? Just because there's a lot of language stuff to unpack. Started. Okay, it's not that long. It should be hard. If you saw the name of the school, it's the Linguistic.
हमने कल फिल्म देखनी है औरत राज।
Again,
खुदा हाफिज। तुमने मेरा फिर रास्ता रोका? जहाँ मैं देखता हूँ मैं नहीं चली आती हूँ, क्योंकि तुम ऐसे तुम मुझे को सताती हो। ये तो बताओ तुम मेरी कौन हो?
ओए, इसी मार के बुलाया गई वार में, कभी तू मेरी गल ना सुनी और बेटी मार के।
सुनिए, तुम्हारे घर में बाकी अपाई नहीं है कोई?
तो बुझाने चला गया, प्राण पर डोल देते, कारण बिल्कुल चला, एक मैं तो दूसरा चला, तो आएंगी, बोल जो ना, ओए की बताती हो, चुप लो मैनू।
वरना हम तो कुछ कह नहीं सकते, लेकिन कहना ये है कि दादा बाजी जी
क्या हुआ?
गजब हो गया बाजी जी। ऊपर को चकोरी की बहन हमीदा उठा के ले गई बाजी जी।
चकोरी की बहन हमीदा, हमीदा! क्या अंदर चले चलो, वरना
क्या?
वरना जान से मार दूंगी।
बाजी ये तुमने क्या किया?
कोई भी गैरतमंद बहन अपने भाई की इज्जत लूटते हुए नहीं देख सकती।
भाभी ये सब क्या हो गया? मैं बेवा हो गया हूँ।
not really a good masculine equivalent for Riva. So that comedy, again, coming from the linguistic disjuncture, right? So once again, that's the impetus for comedy, but also through satire, the potential for critique. It's critical to note that translanguaging plays a role in the indexicality and citationality of gender here. So in this example, Hamida speaks Punjabi, right, which seems to index this dangerous working class masculinity, which we see in lots of non-satirical films, right? While Ghuman, the guy, speaks this kind of middle class educated Urdu. And I haven't written about this particular part, I haven't figured out kind of how I want to frame it, but all the male characters in this film, they all say, "Hum to kuch keh bhi nahi sakte." Right? So there's a consciousness about that use of voice and the power of voice. Hum keh bhi nahi sakte. Whereas kehna means karna in some kind of way. Okay, so earlier in the movie, Sophia's husband, played by Waheed, who only made one Punjabi film in his career, sings a desperate lament in Punjabi in front of his former wife, while Sultan Rahi, playing himself, who's the hyper-masculine hero of over 800 Punjabi films, is not only feminized like all the other men, but he speaks high register Urdu. So there's a linguistic switch as well as a gender switch. So Sultan Rahi, clad in pink and with long braids and a nose ring, dances before Sophia in a garden, and his song that he does is all Urdu. As her jilted husband watches from the bushes. The mixing of Urdu and Punjabi can be seen as targeted toward a filmmaking public that at this time consumed cinema in both languages. But at the same time, the linguistic choice to have Murad sing in Punjabi and Rahi speaking and singing in formal Urdu also heightens the topsy-turvy carnivalesque aspect of the film, as not only are gender boundaries crossed, but linguistic and perhaps ethnic ones. So, I'll try to wrap it up. Okay. Pointing towards some other films. So cinematic gender crossings, productively read as hacking in a recent analysis of Aurat Raj by Saida, create ambiguities that open up a great deal of possibility for the audience as well as the characters. So the audience can enjoy women smoking, roaming in public space, acting as sexual aggressors. They can revel in the carnivalesque emasculation of popular hyper-masculine film heroes, as well as enjoying play with familiar cinematic tropes. As Gayatri Gopinath has argued for Bollywood films, viewing practices can open up even heteronormative and nationalist texts to queer or otherwise subversive interpretation by audiences. While I disagree with Mukhtar's ultimate conclusion that Aurat Raj is a feminist film, because ultimately the patriarchal order is restored and there's not a lot of questioning of binaries going on, but by emphasizing the contingency of gendered indices, the film does permit its audience space to reframe within limits the conventional understandings of gender, power, sexuality, and desire. As I've argued throughout this paper, a key yet under-theorized dimension in which this reframing occurs is the linguistic. An attention to linguistic aspects of performance can deepen our understanding not only of gender transgressive performances, but gendered performance overall. I'll just end by saying that another really productive way of understanding linguistic tropes, such as are found in cinema, is as in registered speech forms. That is, as ways of speaking that have come to be indexical over time of speaker attributes, right? So, you know, this is the idea that certain languages or certain ways of speaking have like built-in, say something about the speaker, right? So Punjabi speakers are X way, right? Urdu speakers are X kind of way. In the longer paper that I'm working on, I use both of these films as a lens to understand later gender transgressive performances that are not explicitly drag, particularly in Punjabi cinema, such as these examples here. In such performances, women's use of stereotypically masculine prosodic elements and speech styles opens up possibilities for them to enact violence and vengeance with and against men. So even though these characters are not pretending to be male, as in Yakkey Wali, or have not experienced a fantastical gender transformation, as in Aurat Raj, they rely on the citationality of their performances to invoke and make claims on particular gendered powers. Ultimately, detailed attention to linguistic dimensions of on-screen performance allows us to see such instances of vocal drag as imbricated in a variety of social indexicalities, deployed in both linguistic and non-linguistic ways. And I will stop it there. Thank you so much, everybody. And I look
familiar with the terms, linguistic anthropology. So if you could explain, I know it's like in your 101 class,
No,
but
no.
citationality, indexicality, it might
Yeah.
help us a little bit.
So indexicality is the quality, it's basically how people create meaning. So indexicality is, comes from the idea of an index, right, in semiotics, where it's something that points to something else. So if I'm wearing a dress, indexes feminine gender, right? If I'm speaking English, it indexes maybe that I'm from the United States, especially if I speak with this accent. Those are instances of indexicality. So essentially, ways of making meaning through different social performances, right? So indexicality is very linked with performance in that way. Does that make sense?
Citation.
Citationality is, you can think of it as kind of like copy, right? So if it's again very tied with performance. So Butler, for example, talks about performance as citational and gender as citational. So if I wear a dress, I'm also linking myself with all the past instances of women who have worn dresses, right? That's the citational aspect. So I have not worn this dress in this room before, but I'm hearkening back to other instances of women wearing dresses standing in rooms in front of things, and that's part of my performance, right? So in film, it's a particularly useful topic because in film we have genres, we have styles of performance that are repeated again and again and again. We can think of every instance of a performance as citing past performances in particular ways. That's very quick and dirty. Is that okay?
Thank you, yes. That helps us. I have a lot of questions, but I'll let other folks ask questions first, and then I'll pipe in if there's time and space. Anyone?
Just to comment, you said, I think in the second part, जहाँ पे वो दिखा रहे थे कि वो कुछ कह भी नहीं सकते. Now that's a very popular, I'm sure you know that that's a popular song, but and जो उसकी response आ रही है, वो that is coming from almost a folksy song. वो आलम लोहार ने गाया हुआ है. ये जो है जो, did you think, I mean, what was the reason that why wouldn't they use normal dialogue? Why would they refer to songs?
No, I
which
hadn't thought of that as linked with folks. I wasn't aware of that. What song is it? Because I don't know.
But I'll share
No, I
that
would
with you.
really appreciate that because
the
that's
one
something I
that
totally missed.
the woman disguised as a man is answering when she says, "Oh, मैं कुछ कह भी नहीं सकती," and he then responds with the bunch of Punjabi again folksy song. So I was wondering what could be. We know that there is the intertextuality in terms of they know they are going to go and watch Aurat Raj, but why have these dialogues?
Yeah, and
which
it
are
comes
then
up
based
different
from
characters say
songs.
different characters say it at different points all throughout the film. All the
yeah.
male characters I think say it at one point.
Yeah.
They say hum kuch hai. And it's also it's not मैं कुछ नहीं कह सकते, it's हम कुछ कह सकते.
Because that's a कुछ कह भी नहीं
Because that's
सकते,
the style.
मजबूर हैं फला कुछ पता नहीं कुछ रह भी नहीं सकते इस तरह. So maybe have you listened to that song?
I have not listened to that song. I would
Okay,
love
so
to share that with me.
I'll share it.
Thank you.
We discussed this before as well, but I found that the making the exotic, the
Yeah.
idea like in Yakkey Wali where you expect a Western style dance and you have the Punjabi, the exotic dancer from Punjab, and then in Aurat Raj where you have the Waheed instead of Urdu speaking Punjabi, and
Right.
Sultan Rahi speaking in Urdu or singing in Urdu. And therefore making the other exotic
Right.
and unexpected. And is that something that through language is something that is in the 60s and 70s is particularly, does it come up a lot? This reversal and the exotic of the other through the unexpected and like the reversal of language or the reversal of
I haven't thought about it that way. I think it might. Do you have anything in mind in particular?
No, I was just That's what I was wondering, like, these are these stars, like when you talked about what happened with Imran and Sultan Rafni, these were stars of,
Yeah.
that.
And like
were-
the audience is so in on that joke,
Yeah.
right? Like the audience would have picked up on that change.
And it is it's a very clear and obvious otherness
Yeah.
that they're doing. Even in Yakkey Wali, that scene with the dancer and the song that she sings, it's it's exact the opposite with this kind of Western audience watching this Punjabi rural dancer and singer. I'm wondering if it's this post-colonial play, or is it this like in that era in that time of films.
No, I mean I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think a lot of like the way I brought up the other speakers that were I think those formations hadn't quite solidified, so there was still kind of this moment of figuring out like what is our cinema supposed to be and what is the other of that cinema.
And who is the other?
Exactly. Yeah. Is it India? Is it the West? Is it Urdu speaking people as opposed to Punjabi speaking people? I think a lot of that is still being defined, and I'm sure it must happen in other films. That fall between these two temporarily.
That's really
Yeah. No, that's a super interesting connection.
Just again a comment, again following up from this discussion, when they are at Philates, the two women who are there, do we kind of find out anything about them? Because for me, I don't know, instinctively I thought that these would be maybe, Anglo-Indians,
That's
these
what I
are
thought
Christian,
Yeah.
but middle class, upper middle class, which I think like later on, they just kind of receded into the background.
Totally.
So I don't know whether that had anything
They
to
don't
do.
come back. We
But
only ever
maybe
see
people
them.
like them, because the other thing I was thinking was that if we're talking about the 60s, and these are people, as far as maybe moving into Lahore is concerned, there will be like a much smaller population, people who've made it there, maybe those who are economically comfortable, these are people who are coming from rural backgrounds.
Yeah.
So is this kind of a play on them, not necessarily just for Musarrat Nazir, but on them that yes, fine, you are in this fancy jazz kind of a place, but again the connections are there. So the thing is that she's not, the person who's come in is not really singing just for Musarrat Nazir. It's just that Musarrat Nazir is interested in that song, but the thing is she's performing for everybody else who's there.
No, for sure. So she ends up in a space where like she is exotifying, basically. Like she's kind of undercover in that space where they're sort of exotifying her.
That, and I think like the film, the director is kind of trying to maybe like rub away from the exterior that the other people who are in Philates who put on, which is that they are maybe denying that connection that they might have with some rural background or something. Because even this person who is on that yakka, once he goes in there, I don't know where does his money come from. If he is an urban person, then I think he should have been more refined, whereas this one is
That's pretty refined. No, I see your point though, right? Like there is
some
that
tension,
is not
there is some
very
tension, yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
In Aurat Raj, the movie, you talk about how three parties were created. One was women's and men's, and one was of Khwaja community. And I was wondering, everyone is kind of transgendering themselves.
Yeah.
So what was the significance of having the Khwaja political party in there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So they, that's really interesting actually, and I hadn't thought of that they are there for the elections in a big way. The elections are conducted through an extended song sequence where they all sing, like "Hum aapke vote ke hakdar hain." And after the election, actually, the Khwaja community disappears, and I don't think you see Khwaja again in the film. So they're kind of there for like a moment of gender play, or maybe you could read it as like a foreshadowing of what's going to happen. And then they're kind of not spoken of after that. That's a really interesting, I hadn't thought about that erasure. And that's a really interesting point as well. Might be like a foreshadowing thing. Yeah, thank you. There's also a moment earlier in the very beginning sequence of the film. There's a drag moment where Rangila appears in drag as his own mother. So there's a lot of maybe foreshadowing going on earlier in the film of what's going to happen.
Are drag performances still there in more recent Punjabi films, or not so much?
I don't know. So earlier Punjabi, Munawar Zarif appeared in drag like quite regularly in his comedy movies earlier on. I can think of like at least 2 other movies. And usually it's like dressing in drag to go and meet a girl, you know. But I can't think of any more recent films where I've seen such a performance. And I think that also has to do with the fact that there are much fewer comedies being made. And because drag performance is usually framed as comedy, so I haven't seen any recent films. It doesn't mean they don't happen, but I don't know of it.
Hi, Yakkey Wali reminded me of Shakespeare's Twelfth Night somehow.
Oh, sorry, what?
Shakespeare's Twelfth Night.
Oh, yeah.
And then there was another kind of homoeroticism when she dressed as the man is looking for another man in the club.
Totally.
But I wanted to ask, why have they retained the linguistic gender in Aurat Raj? Because they're cross-dressed and the voiceover, voice is also dubbed. Why haven't they?
I mean, that's the thing that like blows my mind about that movie, right? Is that they have not changed to men. So they've made it explicit. You know, it's not that we're becoming men or we're taking the place of men. It's now we're going to like put men in our place and show them what it's like. You know, so I think in order to accomplish that revenge perfectly, they have to remain men.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's the same.
I had this feeling because they also look more emasculated than they're saying, oh, main mar gaya, in a feminine way.
It's funnier.
It's sort of emphasized.
It's funnier.
It's funnier and they're more emasculated.
Exactly.
I think that was the intention.
Yeah, I think it's totally that. Like basically the more disjunction, because there's like 4 or 5 layers of gender performance that are all kind of mixed up and switched, right? Because the clothes are there, bodies are a certain way, clothes are a certain way, language is a certain way, bodily comportment is a certain way. Even like filming is in particular ways, like certain shots are very gendered actually, and that's done in particular ways for particular gender.
Seems like intentional misfire, as Austin sort of would say. So.
Yeah, exactly. Intentional misfire. I love it. Totally.
As you mentioned, Butler's theory of performativity as kind of central also for this analysis. So I was wondering what would have Butler thought, like in the way Butler demands that we one needs to unsettle gender categories by kind of breaking them up and being carnivalesque or confuse them. And so here we have a kind of unsettling, but on the other hand, it reifies also the gender roles. So what would that be progressive or in her view?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what she thinks, but yeah, I mean that's why like I read that other piece that came out recently that calls it a feminist film, and I really don't think that's true because it does not reimagine the binary, right? It reifies the binary. It just like switches who occupies the position. So I mean, I think that is kind of keeping it back in that framework. You know,
on the other hand, spectators might have seen like kind of the deconstruction of their own, of the power structure they are.
to have been in that audience. Yeah, totally. I think those possibilities are there. I think people have, I mentioned Gayatri Gopinath, who talks about basically like queer viewing practices of Bollywood movies, which are extremely, patriarchal and pro-state and everything. But the way they get, like, in the diaspora in particular, the way they get viewed queerly in particular ways, and I'm sure, like, this film had that audience. I wish I could, like, talk to them. If you guys know anybody who saw this movie when it came out in '79, like, please send them my way. But like, the possibility is there, totally, right? Like, there is a revolutionary possibility.
And I'm wondering if for the mass audience, the Waheed Maraz and Sultan Rahis and the beautiful Musarrat Nazir who is like the opposite of, if that they allow for them to play with these you know, with these opposing factors to play in drag, to play
Yeah.
because of their star
Oh,
power.
yeah, totally. And
And
because
therefore
so
they're allowed
masculine.
so much more
I mean,
and
Musada
acceptable.
still
Yeah.
has that lipstick on.
Exactly.
And, like, done eyebrows. the whole
And
time.
there's no way you don't know it's her.
Yeah, you can't
You know, she's-
ungender them
yeah,
totally because
exactly.
of their star power. I think that's a really
And therefore allows them to play with it more than
yeah.
and lets them laugh at it more.
I would say especially in Aurat Raj, which is such a like meta commentary filled film, and it's such a self-aware film that it's constantly like making in jokes and references to filming and filmmaking and the film itself. So I think that's a huge part of it. That's star power.
Like, why do you think that like people were like having gender reversal in the movie like Aurat Raj, like men were dressed as women, like they were using the linguistic like मैं ये करता हूँ. So why do you think they use that? Because we see like even in trans people or even in those like people who dress up as a drag, they use like if they are dressing up as a women, they use the language like they use feminine pronouns. So why do you think it was different in this movie?
It's funny, right? But I mean, this is the question that we had back here, kind of similar to that, right? That like, yeah, I mean, that would have been a choice, but then, so two things. Like, first of all, it's more directly at that disjuncture, right? The idea of the intentional misfiring. So like, you're doing it on purpose because it sounds weirder, and it sounds funnier, and it makes you pause when you hear "mein beva ho gaya hu," right? And then also, I think that in terms of the narrative, I think it makes sense as well. Because if they had just become women, that would have been a very different film than saying, no, you're a man, but you have to occupy that space and like feel it as a humiliation. Right? That's a different move. Yeah.
These movies were almost 4 decades ago, and people's mindsets were obviously different. But even today, after like in the postmodern world, when we have such diverse ideas, people still reject satire and comedy. They either take it very seriously or in its literal terms. And there's this radical reaction to comedy. So do you know about like any kind of criticism that these movies must have received? Because they're challenging dominant social roles.
So I know that Yakkey Wali was very poorly received. I don't know as much about Aurat Raj, although I was actually thinking to myself today, like I should probably try to find some reviews of it from the time. Saida was like, do you know anything about Aurat Raj being
Would
She's
be
the real
interesting to
expert.
Would be interesting to see what maybe the censor board
Yeah,
people
oh yeah.
might have thought of this. I don't know whether they would have records
Because it
of.
came out just after Zia came into power as well. It's like, it was like late 79 that it
Yeah,
came
keep
out.
sales records, you know,
Sales, but again, I think censorship people,
Even
they
sales
might,
records are
they
hard to
they might have some
Yeah, the
interesting
censor, that would be,
why
yeah.
they are letting go of certain scenes and why they maybe allowed others to remain.
yeah. No, I should check.
They might have some kind of record of their meetings.
Yeah, it would also be worth looking, and this is a thing that I probably should do, but I haven't done yet, sorry. I wish I could give you a better answer, but I is just looking at the reviews that came out in that period as well, seeing what people were writing about the film. And I haven't done that research yet, so I don't know, I'm sorry. You caught me.
But Yakkey Wali was poorly received.
No, it was a huge hit.
No.
Okay,
But
but this dude
it was a
didn't
hit,
like
but it was thought of as vulgar. It was thought of as very like
So
obscene.
even
and vulgar.
that scene where the woman is patting him down.
Yeah,
and
the scene,
sort
so
of,
there's this scene where the Cindy woman says, "Are you a boy or a girl?" And she like rubs her hand all over his body,
her body.
her body.
You know, but and not even in a sexual way, but
Yeah.
just enough to where it's like, you know, you just touched her boob kind of thing. So that might have been
Yeah.
part of that.
I think because where a man would not actually be able to, a woman would not be able to do that to a man
To a
on the
man,
street. But she's done that to a woman. I mean, I think that was all part of the audience reception of that.
Yeah.
as well.
As well as that lesbian kind of
Yeah.
the neighbor girl falls hard for Lolly and, you know, flirts with her very heavily. And it's not totally clear whether Lolly is in on it or not, is the other thing. So that might have been part of that objection as well. Thank you guys again so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.